Evelyn Mercer's fingers closed around nothing. The tin cup slipped from her grip and hit the dirt floor of Silas Grady's store, rolling twice before it stopped, and every eye in Red Hollow turned to watch her fall to her knees to pick it up, not out of pity, but out of satisfaction. She had not eaten in 3 days. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely curl them into fists. She pressed both palms flat against the floorboards and pushed herself upright, and the laughter that followed her out the door was the cruelest sound she had ever heard in her life. If this story moves something in you, if you've ever been left behind by people who should have helped, then hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happens next to Evelyn Mercer, nobody saw it coming. Not the town, not the cowboy, and certainly not Evelyn herself. The morning Evelyn Mercer rode into Red Hollow on the back of a borrowed mule, she had exactly 4 cents in her coat pocket. A name nobody in this territory recognized, and a hunger so deep it had stopped feeling like hunger and started feeling like something permanent, like a second skeleton growing inside her first one, hollow and heavy at the same time. She didn't look like much. She knew that. She had stopped being able to fool herself about how she looked somewhere around the 3rd week of traveling alone. Her dress had been brown once, a good wool brown that her mother had picked out at a shop in Ohio 9 years ago. It was gray, now gray and thin at both elbows, and it hung from her shoulders like it was embarrassed to be seen with her. Her boots had a split along the left sole that she'd tried to fix with a strip of leather, and 2 borrowed nails, and every 3rd step it flapped open like a mouth trying to say something she didn't want to hear. Red Hollow wasn't large. It was the kind of town that existed because the land around it needed something to exist, not because anyone had ever truly chosen to build a life here. There was a church with no bell, a livery with a crooked door, a saloon that opened before the sun was fully up, and a general store that sat in the center of the main road like it knew it was the most important building and wanted everyone else to know it too. That store was where Evelyn went first. She tied the mule to the post out front, her hands fumbling with the knot twice before she got it and pushed through the door. The smell hit her immediately. Smoked meat flour dust, something sweet she couldn't name. Her stomach folded in on itself like a hand closing into a fist. There were 3 people inside. A woman in her 60s with a gray braid over one shoulder, examining a bolt of fabric. A teenage boy sitting on a barrel near the window whittling. And behind the counter, a man in his 50s with small eyes and a mustache that he had tried to grow into something respectable, and hadn't quite managed Silas Grady, though Evelyn didn't know his name yet. She approached the counter slowly, the way a person does when they're trying to decide how much of themselves to show. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm hoping you might be able to help me." Silas Grady looked at her the way a man looks at something he's already decided isn't worth his time. He didn't straighten up from the counter. He didn't move his hands. He just looked. "I've got 4 cents, Evelyn said. She put the coins on the counter one at a time. Each one made a small sound against the wood. "I know that's not much, but I haven't eaten since day before yesterday, and I was wondering if there was anything at all, bread maybe, or something left from yesterday. Anything you could spare for 4 cents. Silas Grady looked at the coins. He looked at her. Then he looked at the woman with the gray braid, and something passed between them, something quick and small and mean, and the woman turned back to her fabric like she hadn't seen anything. 4 cents, Grady said. "Yes, sir." "You ride in here on that broke-down mule out front." "I did." "Where you coming from?" "Kansas originally. More recently, just the road." He picked up one of the coins and turned it between his fingers. 4 cents don't buy anything in my store, miss. Barely buys the right to stand inside it." Evelyn kept her chin level. "I understand prices are high, but I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for trade. 4 cents for whatever 4 cents can get me." "Can't get you a thing." He set the coin back down. "Not even close." "Is there work then?" "Something I could do this morning in exchange for a meal. I've got all the help I need. A broom. I could sweep the porch, the whole street if you need it." "Street don't need sweeping." The boy on the barrel had stopped whittling. He was watching her now, but he wasn't going to say anything. She could see that already. "Please," Evelyn said. She hadn't meant for that word to come out the way it did, stripped down to nothing, no armor on it at all. She had meant to keep her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to solve all my problems, just today. Just one meal and I'll be out of your store and on my way." Grady leaned forward on the counter. When he spoke, his voice had dropped not in kindness, but in the way a man's voice drops when he wants you to know he's the final word on something. "I don't know you," he said. "I don't know where you come from or what kind of trouble you're dragging behind you. I don't give food to strangers who wander in off the road, and I don't intend to start today. Now you take your 4 cents and you get yourself out of my store before I start thinking about why a woman's traveling alone and what sort of law might be interested in knowing about it." The silence that followed that sentence was very long. Evelyn's hand moved to the coins. She picked them up slowly. She did not look at the woman with the gray braid. She did not look at the boy. She kept her eyes on a point just past Grady's left shoulder, and she breathed in through her nose, and she kept herself exactly as upright as she had been when she walked in. "Thank you for your time," she said. She turned and walked out. The door swung shut behind her, and the sun hit her like a flat hand, and she stood on the porch for exactly 3 seconds before her knees told her they were done, cooperating for the moment. She sat down on the steps, not gracefully, not intentionally, just down. And she put her face in her hands, and she breathed. She was not going to cry. She had made a decision about crying sometime in the second week of the road, and she was sticking to it. Crying used energy she didn't have, and it didn't fix anything. And the last time she'd allowed herself to really cry had been in a ditch outside a town called Milford, when she'd realized she'd gone 6 miles in the wrong direction, and the sun was going down, and she was alone in a way she'd never been alone before in her life. Completely alone, no one expecting her anywhere, no one who would notice. She breathed out slowly. She sat on the steps of Silas Grady's store in Red Hollow, and she looked at the 4 cents in her palm, and she tried to think. She was still thinking when the shadow fell across her. She looked up. He was tall. That was the first thing, because it was impossible not to notice. Not in a showy way, just a man who'd grown up and kept growing without apology. Lean in the way that outdoor work makes a man lean, with dark eyes that were currently looking down at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. He wore a dark vest over a light shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, a brown hat that had seen considerable weather, and a revolver on his hip that he didn't appear to be aware of in the way of a man who's carried one so long it's just part of his shape. He wasn't looking at her with pity. That was the second thing she noticed, and it mattered more than the first. He was just looking at her, like she was a person. "You eat today," he said. His voice was quiet. Not soft, there was a difference, just not loud. "No," she said, and then because she was tired, and because lying about small things felt like an insult to whatever dignity she had left. "No, I haven't." He nodded once, like she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. He looked at the door of Grady's store for a moment, then back at her. "Come with me," he said. Evelyn looked at him. She had spent weeks on the road calibrating her ability to read strangers. It was a survival skill she'd developed out of pure necessity, and she looked at this man and she tried to find the angle, the thing he wanted, the price that was coming. "I don't know you," she said. "No, name's Cade Callahan." He didn't offer a hand, just gave her the name like it was information she could use. "I've got a camp about a mile out, got food. You're welcome to it, no condition attached." "Why?" He seemed to find that a reasonable question. He thought about it for a second. "Because you're hungry," he said, "and I've got more than I need." Seems simple enough to me. Evelyn looked down at the 4 cents in her palm. She looked back up at Cade Callahan. She thought about all the reasons a woman alone on the road should not follow a stranger into the open country. Then she thought about 3 days without food, and the way Silas Grady's eyes had looked when he said the word law, and the way the woman with the gray braid had turned back to her fabric. She stood up, her knees held. "All right," she said. "He had a horse, a big gray animal calm, in the way that horses are calm when they trust the person handling them, and he didn't offer to help her up, which she appreciated. She got herself into the saddle, and he walked alongside, and they left Red Hollow the way she'd come in, back down the main road and east toward where the land opened up. "You from around here?" she asked after a while. "Not originally. Been working this territory about 3 years. Ranching. Some other things." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. They walked in silence for a while, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised her. She had spent enough time with her own thoughts lately that other people's conversation had started to feel like noise. This wasn't noise. "What brought you to Red Hollow?" he asked. "I heard there might be work. Domestic or kitchen work, or I can keep books," she said. "That was my work before, accounting. I kept ledgers for a grain company in Kansas City." He glanced up at her. "Accountant. For 6 years." She paused. "The company closed. Owner took everything he could carry and left on a Tuesday morning. Didn't tell anyone. We showed up for work Wednesday and the door was locked." She said it flatly, the way you describe a fact that still has teeth in it, but you've learned to carry it without letting it bite you. "I had some savings, not enough. And I've got a sister in Arizona Territory, and I thought if I could get there—" "Long way to Arizona from Kansas." "Yes," she said. "I'm aware." They reached his camp, a simple arrangement: a fire ring bedroll, a pack horse with provisions. And Cade Callahan put a pot on without any ceremony and made something that turned out to be beans with dried meat and a hardtack biscuit. And Evelyn sat on a log near the fire and ate it like it was the finest meal she'd ever been served, because right now it was. He watched her eat without staring, the difference between a person who sees you and a person who's watching you. When she set the tin down, he poured coffee she hadn't asked for, and she wrapped both hands around the cup. "Thank you," she said. "I mean it. I know you do." He sat across from her and looked at the fire. "There's something I want to say to you, and I want you to hear it plain, not as charity, and not as an insult." She looked at him. "There's a ranch about 4 miles north of here," he said. "Iron Ridge, run by a man named Warren Vance. He's short a hand since last month, and he's been slow about replacing because he doesn't like interviewing. He's a fair man, harder than most, but fair. Pays on time. The work is heavy, but it's honest." "I'm not a ranch hand," she said. "No, but you can keep books." She was quiet. "Vance has been running his accounts out of his own head for 3 years because he never found anyone he trusted with the ledger. He's made mistakes. Not catastrophic ones, but the kind that add up." Cade turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I can take you out there tomorrow morning if you want. Introduce you. I won't promise anything because I can't, but I can get you through the door." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" He looked back at her, and there was something in his face that wasn't pity and wasn't calculation. Something older than both of those things. Something that had to do with knowing what it felt like to be left with nothing and to have someone step in anyway. "I was in a bad place once," he said. "Different kind of bad place. Someone helped me out of it without asking for anything back." He looked at the fire again. "I reckon that kind of thing moves forward or it stops." Evelyn didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. The fire crackled. The horses moved quietly in the dark. The stars over Red Hollow were enormous and very bright, the way they only get in open country where there's nothing to compete with them. And Evelyn Mercer sat with her hands around a warm cup and felt for the first time in a very long time like the ground beneath her feet was something she could trust. She didn't say she was going to Iron Ridge. She didn't say she wasn't. But in the morning, when Cade Callahan saddled both horses without asking, she braided her hair back and put on the cleanest version of her gray-brown dress she could manage, and she climbed into the saddle and she rode north beside him through the early light without looking back at the direction of Red Hollow. She had 4 cents in her pocket. She had a name and 2 hands and 6 years of knowing how numbers moved through the world. How money came in and went out, and where the gaps were that people tried to hide. She had a cowboy riding beside her who hadn't asked her for a single thing. That was more than she'd had yesterday. For right now, in this particular moment of her life on this particular frontier road, she decided that was enough to move forward on. Warren Vance's Iron Ridge Ranch rose up out of the morning land like something that had decided to be permanent. The barn first, then the main house, then the smaller structures around it, all of it worn and practical and without any pretension whatsoever. The fence lines ran straight. The animals were well kept. Even from a distance you could see this was a place where work was the only language spoken, and it was spoken without complaint. Cade reined in at the gate and looked at her. "He's going to be suspicious," he said. "He's suspicious of everyone at first. Don't take it personal." "All right. Don't let him see you're nervous." "I'm not nervous." He looked at her. "All right," he said. Warren Vance came out of the barn when he heard the horses, a man in his 50s, broad through the shoulder with a face that had been weathered by about 40 more winters than his birth year suggested. He looked at Cade with the recognition of familiarity, and at Evelyn with the flat assessment of a man who had learned to evaluate strangers quickly or pay for it later. "Callahan," he said. It was a greeting and a question at the same time. "Warren." Cade dismounted. "This is Evelyn Mercer. She's an accountant. 6 years with a grain company out of Kansas City. She's looking for work, and I thought you two should talk." Vance looked at her. "Accountant," he said. "Yes, sir." She dismounted herself, which she could see he noted. "I kept ledgers, managed receivables and payables, handled payroll for up to 30 employees at a time. I know inventory systems, and I know how to find where money disappears to." Something shifted very slightly in his expression at that last part. "My books are fine," he said. "I didn't say they weren't." He studied her. "You got references." "The company I worked for doesn't exist anymore. The owner took the funds and left. I have no way to contact him, and I wouldn't want to." She held his gaze. "What I can do is sit down with your current ledger 1 hour, no obligation on your part, and tell you 3 things you don't know about your own operation." Vance looked at Cade. Cade said nothing, which was apparently what he needed to hear, because Vance looked back at Evelyn and grunted. "1 hour, he said. "You stay on the porch. Mabel brings the books out to you. You don't go inside." "That's fine." "And if you're wrong about the 3 things, then I ride out and we never speak of it again," she said. "But I won't be wrong." She wasn't wrong. She found a discrepancy in the feed costs that had been running long for 8 months, small enough per entry to miss, if you were tired, large enough accumulated to matter. She found that 2 supply invoices had been paid twice, once in cash, and once by exchange, with neither payment recorded against the other. And she found that the labor records for seasonal workers didn't match the payroll entries for the same period, not by much, but by enough that someone somewhere had been skimming. She put all 3 on a sheet of paper she borrowed from Mabel, the ranch's quiet and watchful cook, and she walked that paper out to where Warren Vance was working by the fence. She handed it to him without a word. He read it. He read it again. He folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, and he looked at her for a long time without speaking. "You can start Monday," he said at last. "I'd like to start today," she said. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to his face, but it was close. "Today," he said. "I work better when I can see the whole picture at once. The sooner I get into the books, the sooner you know exactly where you stand." He turned and looked out over the ranch. 2 weeks trial, he said. "You stay in the bunkhouse, eat with the hands, take the same pay as an entry hand until I see what you're actually worth." "Agreed." "You got a problem with hard work?" "No. You got a problem with honest answers, even when they're not what someone wants to hear." She thought about Silas Grady's store. She thought about the tin cup hitting the floor. She thought about 4 cents, and a split boot sole, and a woman who turned back to her fabric. "No," she said. "I've never had a problem with honesty." Warren Vance nodded. He stuck out his hand. She shook it. Cade Callahan was leaning against the fence 20 feet away, arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular. When she walked back toward him, she could see the corner of his mouth had done something it hadn't done before. 2 weeks, she said. "I heard. Thank you for the introduction." Didn't do much. You did the rest. You got me through the door. He uncrossed his arms and picked up his hat from the fence post. I reckon doors are what they are, he said. What matters is what you do once you're through them. He mounted his horse. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, and then he rode south back toward Red Hollow, and whatever his own business was, and Evelyn Mercer stood in the yard of Iron Ridge Ranch with 4 cents in her pocket and a job starting today, and she watched him go until the gray horse disappeared into the folds of the land. She stood there another moment. Then she turned back toward the ranch, walked through the gate, and got to work. The first morning at Iron Ridge, Evelyn woke before the bell. She lay in the bunk and listened to the ranch breathe around her, the horses shifting in the barn, the wind moving across the roof. Someone coughing twice in the bunk across the room, and she stared at the ceiling and did what she had done every morning for the past several weeks. She took inventory. Not of her surroundings, but of herself. What she had. What she still needed. What she could afford to feel, and what she needed to set aside until later. She had a roof. She had work. She had eaten dinner last night at a table with 7 ranch hands who had looked at her with varying degrees of suspicion and said almost nothing. And she had eaten every bite on her plate and said almost nothing back, and that had seemed to be the right call. She got up before anyone else moved. By the time the bell rang, she had already been through the first 3 months of Warren Vance's receivables ledger, sitting at the small table on the bunkhouse porch with a lantern, and she had found 4 more problems she hadn't mentioned the day before. She wrote them down on her sheet and dated it and set it aside for when Vance was ready to hear it. He wasn't the kind of man you went to. He was the kind of man you waited for, and she'd understood that about him inside the first 10 minutes. The ranch hands filed past her on their way to the morning's work. Most of them didn't look at her directly. One, a young man with a sunburned neck and an expression that hadn't made up its mind about her yet slowed down long enough to say, "You actually found something in those books yesterday." 4 things, she said. He looked at the ledger in front of her, then back at her. "Huh," he said, and kept walking. His name turned out to be Denny Pratt, 19 years old and 3 years on the ranch, and by the end of the week, he would be the only one of the hands who talked to her without being spoken to first. That wasn't nothing. She kept that in the credit column. Vance came to her mid-morning. He didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the porch with his arms crossed and looked at her the way he looked at everything, like he was deciding whether it was worth the time it was taking. "Found more," he said, nodding at the ledger. 4 additional discrepancies, nothing catastrophic individually. She turned the sheet toward him. Collectively, over 18 months, you're looking at a shortfall of about $230 that doesn't trace to any legitimate expense. He looked at the sheet. His jaw tightened. "Who?" he said. "I don't know yet. The pattern suggests it's someone who understood the system well enough to keep the amount small. Small enough that a busy man wouldn't catch it looking at any single entry." She paused. "I need 2 more days with the full payroll records, and I can probably tell you who." Vance looked at her for a long moment. 2 days, he said. "Maybe 1. He went back to his work without another word. That was, she was learning his version of thank you. She was halfway through the payroll records by noon, when Mabel the ranch cook, a woman of about 60 with iron gray hair and a face that had survived more than it was going to tell you about, came out with a plate of food and set it down beside the ledger without being asked. "You didn't come in for the midday meal," Mabel said. "I was working. I noticed." She stood there for a moment, not leaving. "The men think you won't last the week." Evelyn didn't look up from the numbers. "What do you think?" Mabel was quiet for a moment. "I think you ate dinner last night like a woman who's been truly hungry, not just missed a meal hungry. And I think a woman who's been truly hungry and still got up before the bell this morning is harder to move than she looks." Evelyn looked up then. Mabel met her eyes steadily. "Eat your food," she said, and went back inside. Evelyn ate. She went back to the numbers, and by 3 o'clock that afternoon, she knew exactly who had been taking from Warren Vance for a year and a half. His name was Pete Haller, and he had been the ranch's supply coordinator, the man who handled the ordering and receiving of goods, who signed for deliveries, who reconciled inventory against purchase records. He was also, Evelyn now knew, the man who had been inflating purchase orders by small amounts on a rotating cycle, collecting the difference in cash from a supplier who was presumably getting something in return. The amounts per transaction were never more than $4. Over 18 months, they added up to $247.60. She wrote it up clearly with the specific entries cited and the pattern laid out so plainly, a man who'd never looked at a ledger in his life could follow it. She found Vance at the barn. She handed him the report and stood back and watched him read it. The color in his face changed in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with controlled fury. He read it twice. He folded it. "Pete Haller," he said. "Yes. He's been here 4 years. I know." She said it gently because she understood what 4 years meant to a man like Warren Vance. It wasn't just an employee. It was a level of trust that was now a kind of injury. Vance stared at the barn wall for a moment. Then he said, "Where is he now?" "I don't know." He handed the report back to her. "Keep this," he said. "I'll need it documented when I talk to the sheriff. I can prepare a formal statement if that would help. Do that." He looked at her. "You did this in 1 day. You said 2 weeks trial." "I know what I said." "The trial stands," she said. "I want to earn what I get paid. Mr. Vance not get it handed to me for one good afternoon." He studied her for a moment, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen on him before. Something caught between surprise and respect and clearly uncomfortable in both directions. "Trial stands," he said. "But I'm moving you out of the bunkhouse. There's a room off the main house. Mabel can show you." "That's not necessary." "It's not about necessary," he said. "It's about having the person who handles my books close enough that I can knock on a wall if I need her." He walked past her toward the main yard. "Ask Mabel," he said over his shoulder. That night, for the first time in longer than she could accurately count, Evelyn Mercer slept in a room with a door that locked from the inside. She lay there in the dark and listened to that fact settle around her, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Not safety, she was too practical for that word, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like tomorrow might be different from today. She was asleep before the thought finished. The next 3 days were the hardest of her physical life. Vance, to his considerable credit, did not treat her like a bookkeeper who was exempt from the ranch's general labor. She had not asked to be exempt, and she would not have accepted it if she had been offered. But it would have been easy for him to arrange it, and he didn't. She kept the books in the morning and worked alongside the hands in the afternoon, and the work was, there was no other word for it, brutal. Her hands blistered by the end of the first day, and cracked by the end of the second, and by the third morning, she could barely close them around a coffee cup. She did it anyway. She did not say anything about her hands. She noticed that Mabel noticed, and that Mabel left a small tin of something on the table beside her ledger that turned out to be a salve that smelled like pine, and worked better than it had any right to. And she applied it without comment, and put the tin in her pocket, and kept going. The hands watched her. Not cruelly, not kindly, the way working people watch someone new measuring without commitment, waiting to see if the performance was temporary. On the 4th afternoon, Denny Pratt was struggling with a fence section that had come apart in the night, and Evelyn was 2 posts down stringing wire, and he swore under his breath for the 3rd time, and she said without looking up, "The tension's off on your left side. Pull it back about 6 inches before you secure it, or the whole thing'll sag again by morning." He looked at her. "You know fence work." "I know geometry," she said. "Pull it back." He pulled it back. The section held. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Where'd you work before here?" "Kansas City." "You a city woman?" "I was born in Ohio," she said. "Grew up working my father's property before he sold it. I know what a fence post is supposed to look like." He absorbed that. "The men think you won't last the month." "Denny," she said, "the men thought I wouldn't last the week. At some point, they're going to have to update their thinking." He almost laughed. It was a good sound. By the end of the first week, 3 of the 7 hands had started nodding at her in the morning. By the end of the second, 2 of them were stopping by the porch in the evening to ask questions. Small ones, practical ones, things they'd wondered about but hadn't known who to ask. How the supply invoices worked, whether the feed costs were typical for the season, what the book said about whether Vance could afford to take on another horse before winter. She answered them straight, without condescension and without performance, the same way she'd answered Warren Vance, and they listened in the same way working people listen when they realize someone is actually talking to them and not just at them. Vance watched this from a distance and said nothing, which she was coming to understand was his particular version of approval. It was on the 9th day that Cade Callahan came back. She heard his horse before she saw him, and she recognized the sound. The gray animal had a particular rhythm to its movement, unhurried and even, and she looked up from the ledger, and he was riding in through the gate, and something in her chest did a thing she chose not to examine too closely. He dismounted in the yard, and Vance came out of the house to meet him, and the 2 men spoke quietly for several minutes before Vance nodded toward the porch where she was working. Cade looked over. He touched his hat brim. She nodded back. He came over when Vance went back inside. "You stayed," he said. "I said I would." "You didn't say that, actually." She thought back. "No," she admitted. "I didn't." She set down her pen. "How are you?" "Fine. Passing through." He leaned against the post. "Vance says you found a thief in his books." "Former thief. He's gone now." "Heard he left the territory entirely." "Probably smart of him." She looked at Cade. "You could have told me the job involved more than accounting." "It always does on a ranch. I mean the labor, the fence work, the loading." "Would you have come if I'd said that?" She considered it honestly. "Probably," she said. "But I would have appreciated knowing." He almost smiled. That near smile she was beginning to catalog and to understand was the maximum he issued on most subjects. "How are your hands?" She looked down at them. The blisters had toughened into calluses now, which she found she didn't mind. There was an honesty to calluses. They were exactly what they appeared to be, evidence of work, nothing more and nothing less. "Fine," she said. "Mabel's been helpful." "Mabel's good people." "Yes." She paused. "Thank you, Cade, for bringing me here." "Already said it wasn't much." "And I already said it was." She picked up her pen again. "You have business with Vance." "Some. I'll be here a few days, most likely." She nodded and went back to the numbers, and he stayed there for another moment, leaning against the post, not speaking, not leaving, just present in the particular quiet way that seemed to be his natural state. And she found she didn't mind that either. It was the morning of the 11th day when she found the second set of books. She wasn't looking for them. She was cross-referencing land records Vance had asked her to review a property boundary dispute that was going before the county office, and she pulled a secondary ledger from the cabinet at the back of the office that was labeled simply Correspondence Accounts, and she opened it, and what she saw made her sit very still for a long moment. It wasn't Vance's writing. She knew his handwriting well by now, large, slanted, slightly right, the numbers written with the kind of deliberate care of a man who'd been told his writing was bad and had spent 40 years proving otherwise. This was different. Smaller. Tighter. Entries going back almost 2 years. And the name at the top of the first page was one she recognized. Silas Grady. She turned the pages slowly. What she was looking at was not Iron Ridge's ledger. What she was looking at was a record of payments, regular, structured, systematic, from a source she couldn't yet identify, flowing through Grady's store accounts and into what appeared to be a land acquisition fund. The amounts were significant. Significantly more than a general store in a town like Red Hollow had any business generating. She turned to the last entry. It was dated 6 weeks ago. The amount was $400. And the notation beside it read, IR, boundary, confirm acquisition pending. IR, Iron Ridge. Her hands had gone very still on the page. She looked at the entry again. She looked at the date. She turned back to the beginning and read it through again carefully this time. And by the time she reached the last page, a second time, she understood what she was looking at. Someone was trying to acquire Iron Ridge Ranch, not through a fair offer, through a systematic campaign of financial pressure, inflating costs, draining resources, setting up the conditions for a forced sale. Pete Haller hadn't been some opportunistic thief. Pete Haller had been placed, and the man behind it, the man whose neat small handwriting ran through every page of this ledger, was Silas Grady. She closed the book. She sat in the quiet of the office, and she thought about a tin cup hitting a dirt floor and rolling twice and coming to rest, and about a woman turning back to her fabric, and about 4 cents laid on a counter by hands that were shaking. She thought about what she was going to do with this information, and how she was going to say it, and to whom she was going to say it first. She picked up the ledger and stood up. She went to find Warren Vance. Warren Vance read the ledger twice. He did it the same way he did everything, without rushing, without any visible reaction that he wasn't ready to show. He sat at his desk with the book open in front of him, and he turned the pages at the same steady pace a man turns pages when he's making sure he understands exactly what he's looking at before he allows himself to feel anything about it. Evelyn stood near the door and waited. When he finished the second read, he closed the book. He put both hands flat on the desk. He looked at the wall for a moment, and then he looked at her. "You understand what this means," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Pete Haller wasn't working for himself. No, the payment pattern is too structured for that. Someone was directing him, telling him how much to take, when to take it, how to spread it across the entries so it wouldn't show up in a single audit. She crossed to the desk and opened the ledger to the third page. Here, these notation marks in the margin. They're not accounting symbols, they're communication markers. Someone was reviewing his work and confirming each cycle. Vance looked at the marks. His jaw tightened again, the same way it had when she'd handed him the first report. "Grady," he said. "His name is on the front page, and the handwriting is consistent throughout. I'd want to compare it to a known sample to be certain, but the formation of the 5s and 7s is distinctive. Someone who writes numbers the same way every time for a long time." "I've seen Grady's writing," Vance said, "on invoices, supply contracts." He picked up the ledger and looked at the front page again. "That's his hand." "Then we have documentation." "Documentation." He said the word like it was something he was testing the weight of. "For a county sheriff who drinks in Grady's saloon twice a week." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. That was a problem she had not yet fully mapped. "Is there a circuit judge? Comes through every 3 months. Last visit was 6 weeks ago. So the next visit is in 6 weeks. Give or take. Then we have 6 weeks to build a case that's airtight enough that even a sympathetic sheriff can't argue with it." She looked at him steadily. "That's enough time if we move carefully." Vance looked at her. "You're not afraid of this." "I'm afraid of it," she said. "I'm just not going to let that decide anything." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. "I need to talk to Callahan," he said. She had expected that. "He's in the barn." Vance picked up the ledger and walked out. Evelyn followed, and the three of them stood in the yard in the late afternoon light. Vance, Cade, and Evelyn and Vance laid it out plainly. The second ledger, the payments, Grady's name, the notation on the last page about the Iron Ridge boundary acquisition. Cade listened without interrupting. When Vance finished, Cade looked at Evelyn. "You found this cross-referencing land records," he said. "I was looking at the boundary dispute you mentioned," she said to Vance. "The one going before the county office. I pulled the secondary cabinet for supporting documents, and the ledger was filed behind a surveyor's map." "Filed or hidden," Cade said. She thought about that. "Hidden badly," she said. "Which either means whoever put it there was careless, or they didn't expect anyone who could read it to be looking." Cade looked at the ledger in Vance's hands. "They didn't count on you," he said. "They didn't count on anyone who could read it," she corrected. "I'm not special. I'm just the first person with accounting training who's had access to this office in 2 years." "That's not nothing," Cade said quietly. Vance had been looking out toward the road while they talked. "Grady's not working alone," he said. $400 flowing through a general store in 6 weeks, that kind of money comes from somewhere larger. Railroad maybe. Land company. There are 3 railroad surveying operations in the territory right now, Evelyn said. All 3 have been filing boundary inquiries with the county land office. I read about it in the county gazette that Mabel gets. If someone is acquiring land parcels systematically ranch by ranch and using Grady as a local intermediary, then Iron Ridge isn't the only target, Cade said. The 3 of them stood with that for a moment. How many ranches are in a 20-mile radius of Red Hollow? Evelyn asked. 7, Vance said, counting mine. And how many of them have had supply problems in the last 2 years? Cost increases that didn't track with market prices. Staff turnover they couldn't explain. Vance's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Henderson's lost 2 hands last spring. Boyd Whitmore had a feed supplier back out of a contract mid-winter with no explanation. Clara Holt, she runs the northernmost spread, had a water rights dispute come out of nowhere last fall, some company filing she'd never heard of. It's not just Iron Ridge, Evelyn said. No, Cade said. It isn't. Vance handed the ledger to Cade. What do you need? He said to Evelyn. The question landed differently than she expected. Not what are you going to do? Not what do you think we should do? What do you need? As if it was already settled that she was the one who knew the path forward, and they were waiting to be useful to her, she straightened. I need access to the county land records, not copies the originals or at minimum certified records of the boundary filings for the past 2 years. I need a sample of Grady's signature from a legitimate document, a supply contract, an invoice, anything he signed in an official capacity. And I need to talk to the other ranchers. I can get the land records, Cade said. I know the county clerk. How well? Well enough that he'll let me look without asking too many questions. Then I need you in Millfield by Thursday. She turned to Vance. The boundary dispute going before the county office, the one you asked me to research. When is the hearing? 2 weeks from Friday. Then we have 13 days to turn this ledger into something a circuit judge can act on. She looked at both of them. And I need to do it without tipping Grady off that anyone's found it. Cade looked at her with that expression she was becoming familiar with, the one that was somewhere between evaluation and something warmer that he consistently refused to name. 13 days, he said. Is that a problem? No, he said. Just making sure I heard right. Vance almost smiled again. It still didn't quite make it all the way. I'll start making calls to the other ranchers, he said, quietly. That night, Evelyn sat up until well past midnight, reconstructing the payment timeline from the correspondence accounts. Ledger onto clean paper, a document that laid out every transaction, every notation, every marker, in a form that told the story from beginning to end as plainly as a story could be told. Numbers didn't lie. That was the thing she had always loved about them, even as a child, when her father's ledgers had seemed like magic to her, the way they captured truth and held it still. A dishonest man could tell a convincing story with words. He could not tell one with correctly reconciled numbers. The numbers always remembered. She finished at midnight and read the document from beginning to end and found it good. She went to bed and slept 4 hours and was at the table before the bell. Cade left for Millfield at first light. He didn't come to tell her he was going. She heard his horse in the yard and looked out and saw him riding through the gate. And something in her chest did the thing again, and she turned back to the numbers and kept working. 3 days passed. She worked. She ate. She helped with the fence line in the afternoon because she had said she would, and because the physical work cleared her head in a way that sitting with numbers all morning sometimes prevented. Denny Pratt worked beside her most afternoons now, without any self-consciousness about it, which she counted as a genuine achievement. She had learned his story, a family in Missouri, a father who'd drunk the farm away, a younger sister he sent money to every month from his Iron Ridge wages. He was 19 years old and already carrying the weight of people who depended on him, and she recognized something in that she didn't say out loud, because he hadn't asked her to. On the third evening, Vance called a quiet meeting in the main house. 4 ranchers came, not 7. Vance had been selective, choosing the ones he trusted and leaving the rest for a later conversation when there was more to show. Clara Holt came in from the north, a woman in her late 50s, with the kind of face that has made its peace with hard weather and hard decisions. Boyd Whitmore came down from the ridge, heavy-set and slow-moving, in the way of a man who conserves his energy because he's learned that energy is finite. Thomas Henderson came with his son, a young man, who said nothing and saw everything. And Ida Merritt came from the eastern edge, a widow who'd been running her spread alone since her husband died 3 winters past, and who sat down at Vance's table and put both hands flat on the surface like she was claiming territory. Evelyn laid out the document she'd prepared. She walked them through it page by page, pointing to the entries, explaining the pattern, making it impossible to misunderstand. The room was very quiet when she finished. Clara Holt spoke first. "Grady," she said. "Just the name, flat and certain." "Yes," Evelyn said. "He filed on my water rights," Clara said. "Through a company called Meridian Land Associates. I never heard of them before, couldn't find them in any directory." "They're in the ledger," Evelyn said. She turned to the relevant page. "Here, $1,200 flowing from Meridian into Grady's operating account over 4 months. The timing corresponds with your water rights dispute." Clara looked at the page for a long moment. Then she looked at Evelyn. "Who are you?" she said. Not unkindly, but with the directness of a woman who doesn't have time to work around the question. "I'm Warren's bookkeeper," Evelyn said. "I arrived here 11 days ago." "Where from?" "The road, mostly. Before that, Kansas City." Clara looked at Vance. Vance looked at the table. That was apparently sufficient reference because Clara looked back at Evelyn and nodded once. "What do we do?" she said. Evelyn had been waiting for that question. "We file a counterpetition with the county land office before the boundary hearing in 13, now 10 days. We attach certified copies of this documentation as evidence of a systematic fraud scheme. And we send a copy to the Territorial Attorney General's office in advance, so that by the time the circuit judge comes through, there's already a formal inquiry on record that the local sheriff can't quietly make disappear." Whitmore leaned forward. "You think a woman filing a petition is going to move a county land office?" Evelyn looked at him. "No," she said. "I think a documented fraud case involving 6 ranches, a coordinated scheme to drive land values down before forced acquisition, and a named intermediary with traceable payments is going to move a county land office. My name will be on the filing as the accountant of record. Warren Vance's name will be on it as the primary complainant. The evidence speaks regardless of who carries it." Whitmore held her gaze for a moment. Then he leaned back. "All right," he said. Ida Merritt hadn't spoken yet. She spoke now. "Grady's going to know," she said. "When the petition hits the land office, someone will tell him. He didn't get this far by being careless about what's happening around him." "I know," Evelyn said. "He's got men," Ida said. "Not ranch hands, men he keeps on payroll for other purposes. The kind that showed up at the Ryland spread 2 years back when Ryland decided he didn't want to sell." The room went quiet again, differently this time. "What happened to Ryland?" Evelyn asked. "Barn fire," Vance said. "Middle of the night. No one hurt, but the barn was gone. Ryland sold inside a month." Evelyn absorbed that. "Then we file and we prepare at the same time," she said. "The petition goes in. The evidence goes to the territorial office. And we don't leave the ranches unguarded at night until this is resolved." "That's a lot of ground to cover," Henderson said. It was the first thing he'd said all evening. "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm open to better ideas." No one offered one. Clara Holt stood up. She looked around the table at the other ranchers, and then she looked at Evelyn, and there was something in her face that Evelyn recognized from the mirror, on the rare occasions she stopped long enough to look in one. The particular expression of a woman who has been doing difficult things alone for a long time and has just recognized the possibility of not doing them alone anymore. "I'll sign the petition," Clara said, "and I'll have 2 of my men rotate through the night watches on the South Road starting tomorrow." Whitmore put his hat on. My boy can cover the ridge road, he said. He doesn't sleep much anyway. Ida Merritt stood up and pulled on her coat without preamble. I'll be at the land office myself when the petition goes in, she said. I want to look whoever's behind that counter in the eye when they receive it. She looked at Evelyn. You'll have the documents ready. By Monday, Evelyn said. Today is Thursday. I know what day it is. Ida looked at her for a moment. Then, and it was the most economical smile Evelyn had ever seen, just the barest movement at the corners of her mouth. Monday, she said and walked out. The meeting broke up. Vance showed the ranchers out and came back and stood in the doorway of the main room looking at Evelyn, who was already reorganizing the documents. You did good in there, he said. Whitmore was going to be difficult. Whitmore's always difficult. You didn't let it slow you down. She put the ledger pages in order. I need Cade back by Saturday. The land records from Millfield are the last piece. I can't complete the petition without the boundary filing numbers. I'll send word. Thank you, Warren. He started to leave, then stopped. He turned back. For what it's worth, he said without looking at her directly in the way of a man for whom this kind of statement costs something, I'm glad Callahan brought you out here. So am I, she said. And she meant it in ways she was still counting. She was still at the table at 11 o'clock that night when she heard a horse in the yard. She looked out. Cade Callahan swung down from the gray horse, reached into the saddlebag, and pulled out a thick leather case. He came in without knocking. The door was open, and dropped the case on the table in front of her. Every boundary filing in the county for the past 3 years, he said. Certified copies. The clerk owed me a favor. She looked at the case, then at him. He had been riding hard. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the dust on his coat, the way he was standing like a man who's been in the saddle too long and isn't complaining about it. I said Saturday, she told him. You needed them Thursday, he said. She looked at him for a moment. There's coffee on the stove, she said. It's been there a while. That's fine. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Tell me what you need from these. She opened the case and spread the first set of documents on the table, and they worked side by side through the boundary filings, while the lamp burned low and the ranch was quiet around them. And it was sometime around 1 in the morning that she found the filing she had been looking for, the one that connected Meridian Land Associates directly to a territorial railroad charter that had been quietly approved 14 months ago. The one that made everything else make sense. The one that turned a local extortion scheme into a coordinated corporate land grab that reached all the way to the territorial capital. She set the document down. Cade looked at it. He read it. He looked at her. This goes higher than Grady, he said. Much higher, she said. Grady isn't running this. He's a local mechanism. Someone above him is running this, and they are running it very deliberately, and they have been for at least 18 months. She looked at the document again. There was a name on the railroad charter, not Grady's name, not any name she recognized, but it was a name. And names like numbers were things she was very good at following. I need 1 more day, she said. You'll have it, Cade said. She looked at him across the lamplight. His face was tired and certain and present in the particular way of a man who has decided that wherever this is going, he is going there too. She turned back to the documents. She had work to do. The name on the railroad charter was Edmund Hale. Evelyn found him in 3 places before sunrise. The charter itself, a Territorial Land Commission report from 14 months prior, and a deed transfer record for a parcel 12 miles east of Red Hollow that had changed hands for a fraction of its value 8 months ago. The previous owner of that parcel was a rancher named Gus Ryland, the man whose barn had burned. She wrote the name at the top of a clean sheet and drew lines outward from it, the way you draw a river system, the main channel, and all the tributaries that fed it. Edmund Hale at the center. The railroad charter branching left. Meridian Land Associates branching right. Silas Grady at the bottom, the local mouth of the whole operation. The man who collected and intimidated and arranged, while someone far above him in a territorial office kept his own hands entirely clean. Cade was asleep in the chair across from her. She hadn't told him to stay, and she hadn't told him to go, and he had simply stayed the way he did most things without announcement, without requiring acknowledgement. His hat was on the table. His arms were crossed. He breathed evenly. She looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then looked back at the document. By the time the sun was coming up, she had the complete picture laid out in 12 pages of clean, cross-referenced documentation. Every transaction, every filing, every connection between Hale's railroad charter and the systematic acquisition of land parcels across the territory. It was the kind of document that didn't argue. It simply showed. And what it showed was a scheme so deliberate and so patient that it had been operating for nearly 2 years without a single person in Red Hollow understanding what they were standing inside of. "Cade," she said. He was awake immediately, the way people are when they've trained themselves to sleep lightly. His eyes opened, and he was present, not groggy, not slow. Just present. "I know who's running this," she said. He looked at the 12 pages on the table. He looked at her. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. Edmund Hale, the Railroad Charter, Meridian Land Associates. The pattern of acquisition, the Ryland Barn, the water rights dispute against Clara Holt, the coordinated pressure against 7 ranches over 18 months. She laid it out the same way she'd laid it out at Warren Vance's table, plainly, completely without drama, because the facts themselves were dramatic enough. When she finished, Cade was quiet for a moment. "Hale has a territorial office," he said, "in Prescott. I know. He has connections to the Land Commission, to the Survey Authority, possibly to the Circuit Court." He looked at the document. "A petition to the county land office isn't going to reach him." "No," she said. "It won't. But it doesn't have to. The county petition is for Grady. It addresses the local fraud, the manipulation of Iron Ridge's accounts, the false supply contracts, the boundary interference. That's prosecutable at the county level, and it names Grady specifically." She turned to the second section of her document. "This, the railroad charter, the Meridian connection, the territorial level acquisition scheme. This goes to the Attorney General's office directly, and it goes with enough documentation that they can't decline to act without creating a record of their own refusal." Cade looked at her. "You've been thinking about this all night." "I've been working on this all night," she said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She almost smiled. "The thinking part was done when I found the charter. The work is making it impossible to ignore." He stood up and stretched and picked up his hat. "I know a man in Prescott," he said. "Former Pinkerton. He has contacts in the AG's office that don't run through the Territorial Land Commission." "How soon can you reach him?" "Telegraph from Millfield today if I leave in the hour." "Leave in the hour," she said. He put his hat on. He looked at the 12 pages on the table. "You should sleep," he said. "I will, after I make copies." "Evelyn." She looked up at the sound of her name in his voice. He didn't use it often. When he did, it was always deliberate. "Be careful who sees these documents before the filings go in," he said. "If Grady has someone at the county office—" "I know." She met his eyes. "I'll hand carry everything, no intermediaries." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, put 2 fingers to his hat brim, and walked out. She listened to his horse leave the yard, and she turned back to the copies. She made 3 sets. One for the county land office, one for the territorial attorney general in Prescott, one that she wrapped in oilcloth and hid behind the false bottom of the supply cabinet in Vance's office, which she had discovered by accident on her second day and never mentioned to anyone. If something went wrong, the 3rd set would still exist. She slept 2 hours. She woke up, washed her face, and went to find Warren Vance. Monday came faster than any of them had planned for. Not because they weren't ready. Evelyn had the petition complete, the documentation organized, the certified copies, prepared Ida Merritt's confirmation that she would meet them at the county office at 9 o'clock. They were ready. But the Monday that arrived was not the Monday any of them had anticipated, because at 6 o'clock Sunday evening, Denny Pratt came running in from the south fence line with his hat in his hand, and his face the color of old ash. "Ryder came through the south road," he said, breathing hard. "Didn't stop. Left something tied to the fence post. Vance looked at him. What? Denny held out his hand. In it was a strip of paper folded twice. Vance took it and unfolded it. He read it. He handed it to Evelyn without a word. The note had 4 words on it. Stay home tomorrow. Last warning. No signature. The handwriting was unfamiliar, deliberately disguised. She thought the letters too carefully formed the way handwriting looks when someone is trying not to look like themselves. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in her coat pocket. How many of our night watch are on the South Road? She asked Vance. 2 of Whitmore's men. Add 2 more, and send word to Clara Holt to expect company tonight. You think they'll move tonight? I think they know the petition goes in tomorrow morning, and they don't want it to go in, she said. Whether they move tonight or not, we don't leave anything to chance. Vance was already moving toward the door. Evelyn sat down at the table and looked at the folded note in her hand. Last warning. Which meant there had been a first warning she hadn't seen or hadn't recognized as one. She thought back through the past 10 days, the small things she'd noticed and filed away. A supply wagon that had slowed as it passed the ranch gate 2 days ago without stopping. A stranger in Millfield who had watched Cade ride in from the wrong kind of distance. The county clerk who had been slightly too casual about asking which ranch Cade was representing. She had noticed all of these things. She had not added them together until now. She added them now. Then she stood up, put the note in her pocket, and went to check that the oilcloth package behind the false cabinet bottom was exactly where she'd left it. It was. She put her hand on it for a moment, 12 pages of numbers that told the truth about what had been done to these people. And then she closed the cabinet and went to help Mabel reinforce the shutters on the main house windows. Mabel worked without speaking, which was her way. But at one point she looked at Evelyn sideways and said, "You scared?" "Some," Evelyn said. "Good," Mabel said. Scared people pay attention. They got through the night. Not easily. Not without cost at 2 a.m. There was a sound from the South Road that brought every hand on the ranch out of their bunks, and for 20 minutes no one breathed quite right. And then Whitmore's man rode in to report that 3 riders had come up the road, seen the watch, and turned back without engaging. No shots. No fire. Just 3 riders who had calculated the odds and decided they weren't favorable. Evelyn stood in the yard in the dark and listened to that report and felt the adrenaline move through her system like cold water and forced herself to breathe slowly and deliberately until it passed. Cade arrived back from Millfield at 4 a.m. He had not slept. She could see it in his face, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady when he said, "Telegraph went through. My contact in Prescott is hand-delivering the document package to the AG's office when it opens this morning. There will be a record of receipt before the county hearing starts." "They tried to scare us off last night," she said. His jaw tightened. "Anyone hurt?" "No. 3 riders turned back when they saw the watch was up." He looked at her for a moment. "You held the line." "Warren held the line," she said. "And Whitmore's men, and Denny, who is 19 years old and didn't sleep either." She looked back toward the ranch. "I just organized the paperwork." "Evelyn," he said with that deliberateness again, "you know that's not what you did." She didn't answer that. She turned toward the house. "We leave for the county office in 3 hours, she said. "You should eat something." At 9 o'clock Monday morning, Evelyn Mercer walked into the Red Hollow County Land Office, carrying a leather case containing 37 pages of certified documentation and a petition signed by 4 ranchers representing combined land holdings of over 12,000 acres. Ida Merritt was already there, standing by the counter with her hands flat on the surface exactly as she'd sat at Vance's table, like she was claiming territory. Clara Holt stood to her left. Warren Vance stood just inside the door. Cade stayed outside with the horses, which was his choice, and she didn't argue it. The clerk behind the counter was a thin man in his 40s named Aldous Webb, and when he looked up and saw who was standing in his office, he went very still, in the way of a man who has been hoping for a particular morning and is not getting it. "Mr. Webb," Evelyn said. She set the case on the counter and opened it. We are filing a formal petition of fraud against Silas Grady and Meridian Land Associates with supporting documentation pursuant to the boundary hearing scheduled for this Friday. She slid the primary petition across the counter. Please confirm receipt. Webb looked at the petition. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at Ida Merritt, who was looking at him with the expression she'd promised, direct, steady, unmovable. I'll need to review this before I can confirm. The reviewing happens after you confirm receipt, Evelyn said. Receipt is simply the acknowledgement that the document exists and has been filed, which it has. I'd like that in writing, please. Ma'am, the process for filing a fraud petition requires Section 14 of the Territorial Land Code, Evelyn said, requires that any petition accompanied by certified supporting documentation be received and date-stamped within 1 business day of presentation. Today is a business day. You are open. We are here. She looked at him steadily. Date-stamp the petition, Mr. Webb. The room was very quiet. Webb looked at the petition again. He looked at the 4 women and Warren Vance arranged in front of his counter. He picked up his stamp. The sound it made on the paper was small and definitive. Receipt confirmed, Evelyn said. Thank you. She took the stamped copy and put it in the case. We'll see you Friday. They walked out into the morning, and Evelyn stood on the step for a moment and let the sun hit her face, and she thought about a tin cup rolling across a dirt floor and 4 coins on a counter, and the way that woman had turned back to her fabric, and she thought about how very much had changed in 17 days. Cade was leaning against the hitching post. He looked at her expression and said nothing, which was exactly right. It's filed, she said. I know, I heard the stamp from out here. She almost laughed. Now comes the hard part. This wasn't the hard part. The hard part, she said, is what happens between now and Friday, when Grady realizes the petition is in, and the AG's office has the documentation, and there is no version of this where he walks away clean. She looked down the main road toward Grady's store, visible 2 blocks east, its sign hanging in the morning light, exactly as it had hung the day she'd walked in there with 4 cents and been told she was worth less than the right to stand inside. A man with nothing left to lose, she said, is the most dangerous kind. Cade straightened. Then we don't give him time to be nothing left to lose, he said. We move before he does. She looked at him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we visit the sheriff this morning, he said, with the copies, before Grady gets word from Webb, before he has a chance to arrange the conversation himself. He looked at her. You said the sheriff drinks in Grady's saloon twice a week. That's what Warren said. Does he drink there because he agrees with Grady, or because Grady's is the only saloon in town? She hadn't considered that distinction. I don't know. Then we find out, Cade said. Right now, while the petition is fresh, and the ink is still on it, and we still have the first move. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the leather case. Let's go talk to the sheriff, she said. The sheriff's name was Roy Cutter, and he was not what she expected. He was older than she'd pictured, mid-60s, with the kind of stillness that comes not from laziness, but from a man who has learned exactly how much energy to spend, and on what. He was sitting at his desk when they came in, and he looked at them both with eyes that had seen enough to not be surprised by most things. Evelyn put the petition on his desk. She put the supporting documentation beside it. She did not speak immediately because she had learned that sometimes the documents should speak first. Cutter looked at the papers. He picked up the petition. He read the first 2 pages, carefully set it down, and picked up the documentation. He read 6 pages of it slowly. Then he set it down and looked at Evelyn. You put this together, he said. Yes. In 17 days. 16 technically. He looked at the documents again. Something moved across his face. Something complicated. Something that had been waiting. I've been watching Grady for 3 years, he said, knowing something was wrong, not being able to put my hand on the how of it. He looked up. A woman I've never met walks into my office with 37 pages of documented how. 38, Evelyn said. I added a summary page this morning." Cutter was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up. He was taller than she'd expected, too. "I'm going to need to keep these," he said. "Those are your copies," she said. "I have others." He nodded slowly. He looked at Cade, a look that carried history she wasn't privy to recognition, and something between respect and relief. Then he looked back at Evelyn. "Miss Mercer," he said, "I think you and I need to talk about Friday." She set the leather case down on the chair beside her. She sat down across from his desk. "Yes," she said. "We do." Outside on the main road of Red Hollow, the morning was moving forward the way mornings do, wagons and horses, and the sound of a town working. 2 blocks east, Silas Grady's store sat in the center of it all, its sign hanging its door open, its owner presumably inside, conducting the business of a man who still believed he was holding all the cards. He did not yet know what had happened in the county land office. He did not yet know about the package sitting in the Territorial Attorney General's office in Prescott. He did not yet know that the woman he had looked at across a counter 17 days ago, the woman he had told that 4 cents wasn't enough to buy the right to stand inside his store, was sitting in the sheriff's office 2 blocks away, explaining to Roy Cutter exactly how to dismantle everything Silas Grady had spent 2 years building. He would know soon. That was certain. And what he did when he found out would determine how Friday went. Evelyn knew that. She had known it since the moment she'd found the second ledger. She had planned for it anyway. Roy Cutter spent 4 hours with Evelyn that Monday morning, and by the time she walked out of his office, the sun was directly overhead, and she was hungry in the ordinary way, not the desperate structural hunger of 17 days ago, but the simple hunger of a person who had been working hard and needed to eat. That distinction mattered to her. She noticed it the way she noticed most things now, with a quiet gratitude that didn't require expression. Cade was waiting outside. He had brought 2 sandwiches from the boarding house kitchen down the road, wrapped in cloth, and he handed her one without comment, and she ate it standing on the boardwalk in front of the sheriff's office while she told him what Cutter had said. Cutter had known about Grady for 3 years. He had suspected the supply manipulation, the coordinated pressure on local ranchers, the quiet disappearance of men who pushed back. But suspicion without documentation was a feeling, not a case, and Grady had been careful. Until Pete Haller had been careless enough to leave the secondary ledger in a cabinet that a new bookkeeper with 6 years of training and nothing left to lose had opened on her 11th day at Iron Ridge Ranch. "He's going to move on Grady before Friday," Evelyn said. "Not an arrest, not yet. He wants Grady at the boundary hearing on record, committed to his position, before the full documentation lands on the circuit judge's desk. If Grady runs before Friday, we lose the ability to tie him publicly to the Meridian scheme." Cade chewed his sandwich and thought about that. "Grady will know the petition is filed by tonight." "Yes." "Which means he has 4 days to run, or 4 days to fight." "Cutter thinks he'll fight," she said. "Grady has too much invested locally to walk away clean. And he'll believe up until the moment he's proven wrong that he can still control this. That's how men like him operate. They believe their own system is permanent." Cade looked at her. "What do you think he'll do?" "I think he'll try to discredit the documentation before Friday," she said. "Not by running, by attacking the source." She looked down the road. "Which means he'll come after me." The silence that followed was a particular kind. Not the comfortable quiet she'd grown used to between them, but something tighter, something that had weight. "Then you're not going back to the ranch alone," Cade said. "I wasn't planning to." He looked at her. "Good." They rode back to Iron Ridge together, and that afternoon, Evelyn prepared the final version of the document package for the circuit judge. Not 38 pages now, but 44. Because her conversation with Cutter had surfaced 2 additional connections she'd been able to confirm using the county clerk's archived filings from 1878. Edmund Hale's Meridian Land Associates had been operating in this territory for nearly 3 years, not 18 months. The Ryland Barn hadn't been the first. There had been a ranch called Saddleback Creek, 40 miles west, that had sold under distressed circumstances in the spring of 1878, and the deed transfer had gone through a subsidiary company, that traced back to Meridian through a shell purchase in the territorial capital. She added 6 pages. 44 pages. Every number sourced. Every connection traceable. Every claim capable of withstanding a circuit court examination. She finished at 9 o'clock Monday night and sat back from the table and looked at the document and felt something she didn't immediately have a word for. Not pride exactly. Something more foundational than pride. The feeling of a person who has done a thing to the full extent of her ability and knows without self-deception that it is enough. Tuesday passed quietly, which made everyone nervous. Wednesday was not quiet. Wednesday morning, Grady made his move. Not the move Evelyn had anticipated, not a direct attack on her credibility, not a legal counter-filing. He sent 3 men to Clara Holt's ranch at dawn. Clara's ranch hand rode hard for Iron Ridge and arrived at 7 in the morning. His horse lathered his face set with the particular expression of a man delivering news he wishes he didn't have. Clara's barn was burning. Clara herself was unharmed. She had gotten out, and her hands had gotten the horses out, but the barn was gone, and the 3 men who had done it had ridden south toward Red Hollow without hurrying, as if they weren't concerned about pursuit, as if they expected no consequences. Evelyn stood in the Iron Ridge yard and listened to this report and felt the anger move through her, not hot, not uncontrolled, but cold and clear and purposeful, the way anger is useful when you don't let it run ahead of your thinking. "He's trying to scare the other ranchers off the petition," she said. "It's working," the hand said. "Miss Clara said to tell you she's not pulling her signature. But Henderson's boy rode out this morning, and the word is Thomas Henderson is considering it." Evelyn looked at Vance. Vance looked at the road. "I need to go talk to Thomas Henderson," she said. "I'll take you," Cade said. He was already moving toward the barn. Henderson's spread was 6 miles northeast. They rode it in under 40 minutes, and when they arrived, Thomas Henderson was standing in his yard with his son and 2 of his hands. And the look on his face was the look of a man who had been up all night with a decision that didn't have a good side. Evelyn dismounted and walked to him directly. "I heard," she said. "Clara Holt built that barn herself," Henderson said, "after her husband died, 12 years ago, board by board." His voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him. "My son is 17. "I know," she said. "I'm not a coward," he said. "I want you to understand that." "I do understand it," she said. "And I'm not here to tell you what to do. You know your family and I don't." She looked at him steadily. "But I need you to understand what pulling the signature means. Not for the petition, we have enough signatories without you, but for your ranch. Grady is not going to stop because you step back. He's going to take that as confirmation that the pressure works, and he will apply more of it, and your name is already in the county filing as a neighboring landowner. You are already visible to him." Henderson looked at his son. His son, to his considerable credit, looked back at his father and said nothing, not pushing, not retreating, just present. "The filing stands regardless of whether you're on it," Evelyn said. "The documentation goes before the circuit judge Friday regardless. Edmund Hale and Meridian Land Associates are going to be named in a territorial fraud investigation regardless." She paused. "What I'm asking is whether Thomas Henderson's name is on the right side of that record." The yard was very quiet. Henderson's son said quietly, "Pa." Henderson looked at Evelyn for a long moment. Then he looked at Cade, who had stayed by the horses and was watching with that particular stillness of his not intervening, not pressuring. Just there. "My signature stays on the petition," Henderson said. Evelyn nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just make sure Friday counts for something." "It will," she said. She meant it, and she knew riding back toward Iron Ridge with the wind cold against her face and Cade a steady presence to her left that the meaning of it was now entirely in her hands, and she was not going to put it down. Thursday brought Roy Cutter to Iron Ridge in the early afternoon. He came with a deputy and with a document of his own, a warrant signed by him, and countersigned by the county magistrate for the arrest of Silas Grady on charges of fraud, criminal conspiracy, and incitement of property destruction, the last charge covering Clara Holt's barn. He had moved faster than Evelyn had expected, which told her something she hadn't been sure of until now, that Cutter had been waiting for this for a long time, and that when the evidence arrived, he had not hesitated. "We're picking him up this evening," Cutter said. "I wanted you to know before it happened." "Will he resist?" Vance asked. "Probably not," Cutter said. "Men like Grady, they're not fighters, they're arrangers. When the arrangement stops working, they look for the exit." He looked at Evelyn. "I need you at the hearing Friday morning. The circuit judge is going to want the person who assembled the documentation to be present and available for questions." "I'll be there," she said. "It may not be comfortable," he said. "Grady will have a lawyer, possibly a good one." "I've been uncomfortable before," she said. "I find I manage." Cutter looked at her with the expression she'd seen on his face in his office Monday. Something between respect and a particular kind of relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying something difficult alone and has finally found someone to help him carry it properly. "I believe you do," he said. That evening, Silas Grady was arrested in his store at 6 o'clock. Evelyn wasn't there. She didn't need to be. She heard about it from Denny Pratt, who had ridden into town on an errand and come back with the account Grady had been behind the counter when Cutter walked in, and he had looked at the warrant and gone very still and said nothing for a long moment. And then he had taken off his apron and folded it on the counter and walked out with the deputy without a word, as if he had known the morning was coming and had simply been waiting to see which day it arrived. The store had locked behind him. Evelyn sat with that image for a while. An apron folded on a counter. A man who'd spent 2 years building a system of pressure and manipulation and fear, walking out of his own store in silence. She thought about the tin cup hitting the dirt floor. She thought about 4 cents. She thought about the way he had said the word law with a particular weight, as if it belonged to him. She felt looking at all of that, something that was not quite satisfaction. Satisfaction was too simple. What she felt was more like completion, the sense of a number that has been wrong for a long time, finally being corrected. The ledger balancing. Friday morning came sharp and cold, the sky very blue and very clear. The kind of morning that feels like it's paying attention. The county hearing room was small and full. Every rancher who had signed the petition was present. Clara Holt sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap and the expression of a woman who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the formalities. Ida Merritt sat beside her upright and still. Thomas Henderson stood in the back with his son. Boyd Whitmore took up most of a bench by himself and looked like he intended to remain there indefinitely. Warren Vance sat behind Evelyn, and he put one hand briefly on the back of her chair as she sat down. Not on her shoulder, just the chair. And she understood that was as much as he would say about what she meant to this ranch and to the people in this room. And she found it was enough. Cade sat 3 seats down to her left. He caught her eye once when she sat down and held it for just a moment, and what was in his face was the same thing that had been there the first morning at Iron Ridge when he'd leaned against the fence post and watched her shake Warren Vance's hand. Something certain. Something that had decided. She turned to face the front of the room. The circuit judge was a woman. Evelyn had not known that. She had assumed, without examining the assumption, that the circuit judge would be a man because every judge she had ever appeared before or worked documents for had been a man. But the person who walked in and sat at the front of the room was a woman in her early 60s, gray-haired with reading glasses and a leather case, and an expression of absolute professional calm that Evelyn recognized and respected immediately. Her name, Evelyn learned from the clerk's introduction, was Judge Harriet Sohn. Grady's lawyer, a man from Prescott who had ridden through the night, began with what Evelyn had expected an attempt to challenge the documentation's provenance. Who had assembled it? What were her credentials? Was she licensed in the territory? Had the documents been obtained through proper channels? Judge Sohn listened to him for exactly 90 seconds. Then she held up one hand. "Counselor," she said, "I've read the documentation. All 44 pages last night before I went to sleep. I have questions about the evidence, but they are not questions about who assembled it. They are questions about Edmund Hale Meridian Land Associates and why a territorial railroad charter was approved 14 months ago without the Land Commission disclosure that territorial law requires. She looked at the lawyer over her glasses. Would you like to help me answer those questions? Or would you like to continue questioning the bookkeeper? The lawyer was quiet. Good, Judge Sohn said. She looked at Evelyn. Miss Mercer, tell me about the Meridian payment structure. Start with the notation system in the secondary ledger and explain to me how you traced it to the charter. Evelyn stood up. She opened her leather case. She took a breath. And she told the truth plainly and completely, the same way she had told it at Warren Vance's table and in Roy Cutter's office and on the land records page and in every number she had ever committed to paper, without embellishment, without hesitation, without apology. The hearing lasted 3 hours. At the end of it, Judge Sohn issued 4 orders: the suspension of all Meridian Land Associates pending filings in the territory, pending fraud investigation, a referral of the Edmund Hale charter matter to the Territorial Attorney General for criminal inquiry, the dismissal of the boundary claim against Iron Ridge Ranch, and the restoration of Clara Holt's water rights, pending a full review of the Meridian associated filings against all 7 affected ranches. Grady's charges would proceed at the county level. That process would take months. But the machine he had been part of the larger patient systematic machine that Edmund Hale had been running from a comfortable office in Prescott. That machine had a name now. It had 44 pages of documentation. It had a referral to the Attorney General's office. It had somewhere in Prescott a former Pinkerton agent with contacts who did not run through the people Hale thought he owned. It had been seen. That was the thing Evelyn understood standing outside the hearing room afterward in the sharp cold of that Friday morning. The thing that systems like Hale's depended on, the thing that made them work, that made them possible, that let them run for years without consequence, was invisibility. The assumption that no one was looking carefully enough. That the people being harmed were too busy surviving to trace the harm to its source. That a woman with 4 cents and a split boot and 3 days without food would walk into a county land office and be turned away and go somewhere and disappear and never become the person who unwound the whole arrangement from the inside. Clara Holt was standing beside her. She hadn't said anything since the hearing ended. She said something now. "You know what the strangest part of all this is?" Clara said. "What?" "You almost didn't come in from the road," Clara said. "If Grady had given you a biscuit and sent you on your way, you'd have ridden to Arizona and none of this would have happened." Evelyn thought about that. "Maybe someone else would have found it," she said. "Maybe," Clara said. "But they didn't. You did." Cade came out of the hearing room and stood beside Evelyn, and for a moment all 3 of them looked out at Red Hollow's main road in the winter light. The town looked exactly as it always had: the church without a bell, the livery with the crooked door, the saloon that opened early. Grady's store was dark. Someone had put a closed sign in the window. "What will you do now?" Clara asked. Evelyn had been thinking about that since Monday. "I have a sister in Arizona," she said. "I've owed her a visit for longer than I want to count." She paused. "But I told Warren I'd finish the audit before I left. Properly finish it, not just the fraud documentation, the full operational review, the supply chain restructuring, a system that makes what Haller did detectable inside a month instead of 18. She looked at Clara. "After that, I don't know yet." Clara nodded. "When you do know," she said, "there's work in this territory for a woman who understands where money hides." She looked at Evelyn with that same directness she'd had since the first night at Vance's table. "You've got a reputation now, whether you wanted one or not. Might as well use it for something." She shook Evelyn's hand, put on her hat, and walked to her horse. Evelyn stood with Cade in the cold morning. "Arizona," he said. "Eventually," she said. "That's a long way." "I know. You've mentioned it." He was quiet for a moment. The gray horse was at the hitching post, patient as always. "I ride west in the spring," he said. "Pass through Arizona territory." She looked at him. He was looking at the road the way he did when he was saying something he didn't know how to look at directly. "Is that right?" she said. Well, she said, "it's a large territory." "It is," he agreed. She picked up her leather case. The 44 pages inside it had done their work. The numbers had told their truth. The machine had been named, and the naming had been enough to begin its unraveling, which was all naming ever needed to do. The rest followed from that, as the rest always followed when the truth was written down clearly and placed in front of people who had the authority and the will to act on it. She had come into Red Hollow with 4 cents and nothing else. She was leaving with something that couldn't be taken away, couldn't be locked out of a store, couldn't be told it wasn't worth the right to stand inside a room. She was leaving with the absolute knowledge of what she was capable of, written into the record of this county and this territory in ink that would not fade. A hungry woman had ridden into Red Hollow on a borrowed mule, and the town had watched her fall to her knees and turned away, and one man had stepped out of the shadow and said, "Come with me." And what had followed from that single act of ordinary human decency was a fraud investigation. 4 restored ranches, a circuit court referral, and a woman who now understood with the clarity of a correctly balanced ledger exactly what she was worth. The frontier did not give second chances. Evelyn Mercer had learned that early and remembered it always. But sometimes, if a person was paying attention and willing to work, and refused, absolutely refused to let the worst morning of her life be the last thing that defined her, the frontier gave something rarer and more valuable than a second chance. It gave a beginning. And Evelyn Mercer, accountant, bookkeeper, ranch hand, and the woman who had unraveled Edmund Hale's machine with 44 pages of honest numbers, rode out of Red Hollow that Friday morning toward everything that beginning contained, and she did not look back once.